Today on People in Transition, we're pulling back the curtain on what really happens inside the hiring process and how you can use that knowledge to land your next role faster and with more confidence. My guest is Dan Waskow, a job search expert and coach with over 12 years of coaching experience and more than 20 years as a corporate recruiter for organizations like Dell Technologies, Fidelity Investments, Credit Suisse, PwC, and Madison Gardens, to name a few. He sat on the inside of hiring teams at some of the most competitive companies in the world. Today, he helps job seekers understand what recruiters are actually looking for, from resume strategy and LinkedIn positioning to interview prep and offer negotiation. If you've ever wondered why you're not hearing back, why interviews stall, or how to position yourself strategically instead of emotionally in your job search, this conversation is for you. Dan, welcome to People in Transition.
Thanks a lot for having me on, Bob.
Dan, let's jump right in with some questions here. You spent over 20 years inside corporate recruiting. What's the one thing that job seekers consistently misunderstand about hiring decisions are really made?
So it's a multi-step process when we look at the overall hiring cycle. In working with clients, both on the recruiting side and the coaching side, I found that people often don't realize how much they have to help out the recruiter or the potential employer in really understanding their background. So, for example, if I have an accountant client who I'm coaching in their job search, and she's listed skills such as general ledger and accounts receivable, but the job description also requires accounts payable, she may feel that that's an obvious component of her background that anyone looking at her resume should understand. What the applicant doesn't fully take into account is that recruiters at companies are often so time stretched, working on 15, 20, upwards of 30 jobs in some instance, that the recruiter has very, very little time to review the resume. And as we all know, technology such as AI and other automated processes have also come into play. So it's really crucial to help out the recruiter and help out the potential employer by listing as many skills as possible, especially when you're looking at one job description and applying for one job.
Dan, do you think that this is a good time to be looking for a new job? And what signals should someone watch to know if it's the right time for them personally?
Yeah. So here's the thing about a good time to be looking at a job. I'm not an economist. You can go down quite a number of rabbit holes with listening to overall unemployment statistics, what the economy is doing, what GDP is doing. I've been doing this, as you said, for over 20 years between coaching and recruiting, and I've never seen a slow time in recruiting. There are certainly times that are busier than others, but I sort of reframe the question, Bob, and I think about, rather than is it a good time to be looking for a job, coaching my clients that it's always important to be networking in your industry, building connections, because you never know when an opportunity might come up to either network with a valued contact in the industry, or that an opportunity presents itself when you may not actually be on the job search. So when we think about a good time to be looking for a job, I sort of take that out of the equation and ask my clients, how's your economy? How's your job search going? And then we go from there.
So that kind of leads us to, if I'm feeling stuck, how do I know whether to push for growth internally in my company or start looking externally?
Yeah, that's a challenge that I hear often from my clients in the coaching. And often people will come to me because they're feeling a little stagnant in their current position. And it really has to do, that kind of brings into play some intangibles. So, how are you feeling about your job? How are you feeling about your manager? How are you feeling overall about the company and its culture and the appearance of mobility? A lot of times, folks come to me because they've tried to get a promotion or move in a zigzag direction and explore different departments at a company, and they've just not been successful. And that could be really frustrating. And especially if there's not a good, solid career development infrastructure where a person's getting coaching in his or her job at the current company. So it's really a matter of how long you feel you've given it the good old college tries, they say, and made those inroads versus saying, you know what, my job is okay, but there's got to be something out there that's better. Let's explore a little bit and see what I can find externally while I'm keeping an eye also on internal opportunities.
Dan, I'd be curious for you or other hiring managers, what do you think that is being prioritized right now? Is it skills? Is it experience? Is it cultural fit? What's the thing that's important?
Yeah. So when you're new to a company and you're talking about coming into a company from the outside, so sort of take out the part we just talked about finding a promotion at one's current company or employer, skills is really what gets you in the door for the interview. So demonstrating one's skills, someone's resume, and of course these days LinkedIn is such a powerful tool for the marketing piece. And I tell people all the time, by the way, Bob, that job searching really comes down to two key categories. It's marketing and then it's storytelling. And you have to market yourself well enough to potential employers to get a conversation going. And then once the conversation starts, obviously the storytelling takes over. But when we talk about skills and cultural fit, the skills are what can get you in the door for an interview. Cultural fit really comes up in the interview process when the applicant and the hiring employer can get a more intangible sense of each other and assess cultural fit. I always tell my coaching clients that in the interview process, they have to be interviewing the company just as much as the company's interviewing them. And it's got to work for both sides, or else why do it?
Dan, why do you think qualified candidates apply for jobs that they match very closely with, almost perfect, and they never hear back? What's happening behind the scenes for something like that to happen?
Yeah, I hear this frustration often from my coaching clients, and I think a couple of things are going on in tandem. So, one, I would just call back to my earlier comment about helping the employer realize that you as an applicant are a really good fit. And that often means taking key areas of the job description and making sure that your resume and your LinkedIn profile specifically address those key components of the job description. The other thing I think also is important to realize, and this is where I give perspective to my clients on the job search, is that different companies have different processes. So when we talk about someone applying for a job for which they feel they're a really perfect match, and the company just doesn't even acknowledge them, or maybe they get that wonderful automated email back saying, "We've received your resume and we'll let you know if there's interest." That's where oftentimes a company's overall applicant processing system can fall down on the job. If it's not configured correctly, the applicant may not even hear back that they are no longer being considered, or sometimes it's a falling down on the part of the recruiter, and the recruiter's just not managing their workflow properly, because everyone who takes the time to apply for a job should be acknowledged, in some regard.
Dan, how do you think the applicant tracking system is really screening resumes today? And what do you think are some of the most common mistakes that cause candidates to get filtered out from that applicant tracking system?
A lot of it is technology. So the technology that the applicant can control on their side is making sure to use a really clean format in the resume. So I suggest either no bullet points or very, very few bullet points, and definitely no multicolored resumes, no resumes with fancy text boxes or extraneous visual line breaks between sections, because these are some things that can really mess up the screening technology or the AI, which a lot of employers are now using in their applicant tracking systems to screen out. The other aspects, again, I know I keep harping on it, but it's very important to realize that these applicant tracking systems and AI components of those systems don't work in a vacuum, as a lot of noise, as I call it on the internet, purports them to. Someone is programming them to say, and I'll go back to my accountant example, I only want to see candidates who have both accounts payable and accounts receivable on their resume. Make sure that we're taking into account abbreviations like AP and AR, things like that. So again, it does really come back to input output, and the applicant needs to help the recruiter, the potential employer, and the technology realize that they're the right fit for consideration.
Dan, how do you coach your clients if I don't meet every qualification in a posting? How should they evaluate whether they should even apply or not? And how do they position themselves if they decide to apply?
That's a good one, Bob. So, in most job descriptions that I come across these days, there's a section which employers will call one of several things. It might be basic qualifications, it might be required skills. Some of the startups and more mid-sized companies will title the section, Here's What You'll Bring to the Table. That's a critical part of the job description that applicants need to review. And in those sections, there'll be a certain number of bullet points. My experience, usually between 5 and 10 bullet points. I use a rough guideline of a 75% rule, a job description with 10 bullet points. If a candidate has at least 7 of those bullet points, I suggest to go ahead and apply, even if you don't have those remaining 3 to make a perfect 10 out of 10. If you have fewer than that, and this is not an exact science, but certainly let's take an extreme example. If you're looking at a job description with 10 bullet points and you only have 3 of them, then it's really not worth your time in applying. And there is an effect of diminishing returns, which a lot of people don't realize, because you don't want to over apply to too many roles at the same company. It just appears that you're not doing your research and you're not being thoughtful about how many jobs you're applying for. So quality is better than quantity in this instance.
Dan, you mentioned LinkedIn before. What do you feel the role is of LinkedIn in the hiring process today, and how often do recruiters actually check profiles before reaching out to candidates?
So LinkedIn is really critical these days. It's an added piece of legitimacy, if you will. And often a recruiter or a potential hiring manager can get some additional insight and additional sense of a person who's applying for the job from their LinkedIn profile rather than just their resume. So I recommend always putting a URL web link to your LinkedIn profile on your resume right after your email address in the contact information section of your resume. And there you want to be, what's going to be noticed is different projects that you've done that you may not have put on your resume, different interactions that you have with the LinkedIn community, companies you follow. And this is actually a great tip that I always give my clients. When you're in the process of applying to a job, and it may be the first time you've applied for a job at that company, before you hit that submit button on the application, go to the company's LinkedIn profile. So not the recruiter, not the hiring manager, if you know it, but the actual company itself, and follow the company on LinkedIn. What that does is give the company an additional point of interest in, hey, this person is interested enough in our company, they actually follow us on LinkedIn. So just a little insider tip there, where an applicant can really use LinkedIn to their advantage when they're applying to a job, even if the job isn't posted on LinkedIn itself.
Dan, why do you think that candidates who get through an initial recruiter screening and maybe even have met the hiring team and then they experience radio silence? They're ghosted completely. Is there anything that you would coach a candidate in terms of what they can do if this happens to them?
I work a lot with my coaching clients, Bob, on effective ways and timeframes to follow up. After each interview, it's appropriate to send a quick follow up email. I've heard some people out there say, well, you should really make yourself stand out and use a handwritten note. I'm not such a fan of that because I know very, very few recruiters or hiring managers that actually, first of all, with remote work the way it is these days, where are you going to send it? And second of all, I mean, there have been times where I've worked as a recruiter for years and never opened an envelope. It's just gone by the wayside. But a quick email, a quick on LinkedIn is a great follow-up tool. But to get back to your question about, the dreaded ghosting and radio silence, you do your follow-up in a cadence that is very case by case and job by job, position by position. And I spend a lot of time working with my coaching clients on the appropriate cadence. But at some point, you just have to realize, hey, they're not interested. If they get interested, they'll get back to me, and realize that it's more them than you, right? So don't fall into the frustration of, why aren't they getting back to me? They know how to find you, and it's most often a failing on the recruiter's part, on the hiring company's part. And I don't like it, don't misunderstand me, but I don't like to see people get so discouraged that they can't move forward on other opportunities.
Dan, how do you coach your clients regarding networking and trying to find internal advocates, internal champions in organizations that they might be interested in?
Yeah, that's a real key component of my coaching programs. It's a really great way to get your resume to the top of the proverbial pile when you apply, to have someone at a company that can advocate for you, to your point, Bob. So, the way that I often frame it is, think about some companies that you would really like to work for, and then you need to reach out and cultivate relationships with a few different types of role, if you will, there at the company. And that can be very company by company. It depends a lot of the time on what the person does. But you want to build those valuable relationships. And again, I come back to LinkedIn and using one's own professional network as a starting point, if you will, and just expand out from there. If one is early in their career, it could be family and friends. You have to start somewhere. And it's real critical to have those relationships built, so when the time does come around that you've applied for a job, you can go and say over LinkedIn in a message, hey, Sally, it was great meeting you for a virtual coffee a couple of weeks ago. I actually came across a role and applied today. And you give Sally the role title and a link to the position so she can follow the breadcrumbs. It would be great if you could help me out, put me in touch with the recruiters handling the search, or even the hiring manager. And that's really kind of the cycle of how you'd work LinkedIn to advocate for yourself and improve your chances of being selected to move forward.
Dan, I oftentimes hear that one of the outcomes of networking is for the candidate to get an informational interview. What are your thoughts on that? And are informational interviews useful?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the informational interview, the virtual coffee, the quick connect, that's really key because you can build the connections on LinkedIn and have hundreds or thousands of connections appearing on your profile. But if the person doesn't really know you, then it's not going to be as impactful as if you've had that informational interview, to your point, Bob. So, and there's a cadence that I coach people on reaching out, giving the person at the company with whom they want to connect a reason to accept their connection request, and then kind of move it forward from there. Hey, Sally, thanks a lot for connecting. I'm really interested in your work at ABC Company and would love to learn a little bit more. You know, you insert a little bit about your background. As you may have seen from my profile, I'm an accountant eligible for CPA. I've had 5 years of experience, but I'm starting to feel a little unchallenged. I was wondering if we could grab 10 minutes next week on Monday morning or Thursday afternoon, whichever's better for you, and just have a phone call, or even better, if you'd be up for a video connect, that would really be great. Something along those lines. And then in that 2 weeks that I mentioned before, afterwards, where you do see a role, you can come back and say with legitimacy, hey, Sally, thanks for connecting a couple of weeks ago. Actually saw a role, et cetera, from there. So that's really a great way, whether you call it an informational interview, whether it's a virtual coffee, whether it's a get to know you quick call or video, that's how I'd go about it.
Dan, what have you seen that separates candidates who consistently in the recruiting process versus those who stall out after the first or second round? Are there themes of things that cause the person to not go forward?
So the interviews have already been done, and you obviously want to prepare for the interview, do as well as possible. But after the interview, there's, as I mentioned, a certain, for each company in each different role, what we do is try to assess an appropriate follow up cadence. The other aspect of it is, and this may sound obvious to a lot of listeners, but companies really want to be impressed by your knowledge about them and your interest in the job. So some people may think, well, I'm interviewing for the job. I obviously want it, but that's not how companies operate. Companies want to be shown interest in their position. So, a really simple way that you can do that in each step of the interview process is to say something to the effect of, in the wrap up phase, well, Sally, thanks very much for interviewing me for this senior accountant role. I'm really interested and I like everything I've heard so far. What can you tell me about next steps in the process? And then when you get to the final interview, and often companies will tell a candidate, okay, you've made it this far. This is the final interview with the senior VP or whatever the case may be. You want to say to that senior VP at the end of the interview, I'm very interested in this job and I'm interested in finding out your timeline for making an offer that I can consider. And then the important thing is also to duplicate that cadence and interest with the recruiter. So everybody needs a little help and feel like they're really the top choice these days. So the follow up and the showing the interest is really key.
Dan, let's say that someone receives an offer from a company. What are the factors beyond salary that you think that they should evaluate before making their decision to say yes or not?
Yeah. So the salary obviously is the main framework of pretty much any offer. But other things you want to consider that would be in an offer letter would include benefits such as health insurance and paid time off. A lot of companies have gone to a paid time off bank, is often what they call it, where they'll lump sick days, vacation days, personal time into that bank. It's important to realize how each company is structuring its benefits because I've supported a lot of companies and I've heard about even more companies with my coaching clients. And I can tell you that no two companies have exactly the same benefits package. Everybody has a little bit of a difference. The other aspects you want to consider are the logistics of the job. Is it on site 100% of the time? Is it remote 100% of the time? Is it a hybrid kind of situation? So that's obviously a very important factor to consider these days. What are the incentives? Is it a commission type position? Is it a bonus eligible type situation? And again, bonuses, just like benefits packages, they can get kind of complex. Your point of contact for understanding the differences in the components in an incentive plan and an overall compensation plan is going to be your recruiter, unless the recruiter has turned you over to someone else, perhaps in the HR department, to go over that with you. So, with salary, paid time off, benefits, then you go to the intangibles, which are how well did I like my manager? If I had an opportunity to meet colleagues, how well did I feel I could get along with them? Realizing that in a year or two, those people may change, but it's not a great idea to go into a new job at a new company feeling, well, those people were okay, but I hope I get other people to work with that I'll like better. That's not setting yourself up for success.
Dan, do you think that a candidate should the offer, or does that put them at some kind of disadvantage and a strike against them?
That's a tricky one. A lot of it has to do with how well you've positioned yourself at the beginning of the process. So, most companies these days, and certainly all companies that I've supported in the last 10 years, have had a construct where they've asked upfront what the applicant was expecting in terms of salary. And again, salary is kind of the benchmark aspect, right, of someone's offer. So we're going to restrict our thinking to salary. If I'll just pick some numbers. If you've said in the beginning of the process, well, I'm looking for $100,000 a year, and the company comes back to you and makes you an offer of 100,000, or in best case scenario, even a little bit more, in most cases, it's really going to leave a bad taste in the mouth of the company and the recruiter and the hiring manager if you then try to negotiate it. Because from their perspective, hey, we've given you what you asked for up front. And we had kind of an understanding that that was what you were going to be looking for. Now, the other situation is, well, what if they make you an offer that's less than 100,000? There's no formula for the right way to go about it. Yes, you can negotiate and you can say, well, I appreciate the offer of 95. As I mentioned in the beginning, I was really looking for closer to 100 before. I was looking for 100. Take out the closer to. I fell into a bad habit there for a second, and see what happens from there. Something like that, I think, is not going to be just rejected out of hand, but it's very, very tricky, and it's something that I often work with at the end of the process with my coaching clients.
Dan, we've gone through so much great information. If our listeners remember just one or two items that you want them to take away and implement next week to find that next great job easier and faster, what is those one or two items?
Definitely build your network on LinkedIn. It's absolutely crucial. Make sure that you're paying really close attention to the job description and how well your resume reflects those basic requirements or key components of the job description anytime you apply for a job in which you're legitimately invested. So if you're trying the spray and pray approach where you're just mass applying, which I don't recommend, you're not going to have the bandwidth to do that on every single job, especially if you're conducting a job search while you're working. But for those highlighted jobs where you say, hey, this was really, really interesting, you won't need to make that investment of time to make sure that your resume speaks to the job description. And then make sure that your resume and LinkedIn profile sync up with each other in terms of companies you've worked for and the dates on the resume and the job description. It's often a red flag for a recruiter to get a resume from a candidate and see that they're not working currently and then look at the LinkedIn profile, and the LinkedIn profile has an open date at the end and appears that the applicant is still working at the company, automatically a red flag goes up and thinks, well, what are they trying to hide? Or are they disorganized? So you definitely want to make sure that your LinkedIn profile and resume are synced up in terms of companies, positions, and times of employment.
Dan, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
So I have a website. It's myjobsearchadvisor.com. They can go to the website and read more about me. And I'd actually like to offer your listeners in the US an offer of 15% off of any coaching package if you sign up by the end of this month, so February 27th. Just go to my website, again, myjobsearchadvisor.com, go to book a call, and then when you schedule time on my calendar, please mention the People in Transition podcast in your scheduling note to get 15% off of any one-on-one coaching package.
Dan, I know I can speak for my listeners and say thank you for sharing so many great tips and techniques. This is your time to lean in, to get clear on what you want, and to go after it with confidence. And Dan gave us so many great ideas on how to do that. Thank you, Dan, so much.
Thanks for having me on, Bob. It was great to be with you.